Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast. We cover everything Major League, from spring training to the World Series. We've got your favorite club covered, from New York to Boston to LA. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast.
Hello and welcome in to another edition of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. It is Monday, January 11th. Hopefully you had a fantastic weekend out there. I myself, recording this here Sunday evening, have some football on in the background. We're winding down Super Wild Card weekend here across the NFL. We had some surprises opening weekend. The Rams defeat the Seahawks. We had the Ravens over the Titans. And now the Saints and Bears going at it with the Steelers and Browns going to recap the weekend. So hopefully you guys are enjoying the sports out there. The NBA coming at you fast and furious. NHL coming back this week. But here, we're talking baseball full time, and we got a great show lined up for you. So unfortunately here, to start off 2021, it's going to have a similar vibe to the year 2020, because this past week, since I talked to you guys last, the baseball world lost another legend. Tommy Lasorda passed away this past week at the age of 93. He was dealing with a heart attack. He's had some health issues the past few years. Even as recent as the past couple of months, it's come out that he spent some time in the hospital, spent some time in the ICU, and unfortunately, the good Lord called him home over the past week here. So I wanted to dive into Tommy, discuss some of his quotes, stats, all the good stuff that he's brought to the baseball world and baseball community during his 71. I'm going to pause and say that one more time. 71 total seasons affiliated with the Los Angeles Dodgers and even the Brooklyn Dodgers, if I'm being full disclosure here. But just imagine being with one company, one organization, one entity for 71 total years. I mean, today, millennials out there, if you stay 5, 7, 9 years with an employer, you're pretty much, you are called loyal and things along those lines. So for a gentleman to be with one organization for 71 years is truly amazing, and that's the reason why Tommy has been quoted multiple times as saying that he bleeds Dodger blue. I also read online that he wants the Dodgers schedule put on his tombstone so that people who come to see him know when the Dodgers will be in town and can check out a ball game. But for those of you not aware, Tommy Lasorda, he actually is from Norristown, Pennsylvania, which is the neighboring town that I'm located in. It's actually literally across the street, like 3 blocks now to my left here as I'm recording in the studio. You'll get into Norristown, Pennsylvania. He graduated from Norristown Area High School, which is a very small suburb of Philadelphia and not a known area to produce multiple major leaguers or baseball lifers. But the two that it has produced, Tommy Lasorda, and then I believe his nephew, Mike Piazza, as well, is from Norristown. I know he went to Phoenixville High School, which is the other neighboring town to the city I'm in. So Tommy Lasorda and Mike Piazza coming from the roots here where I currently reside. But he graduated in 1944. He signed with the Philadelphia Phillies as an undrafted free agent in 1945 to begin his professional playing career. At this point, he then missed the 46 and 47 seasons due to a stint with the United States Army, in which he was in active duty. But he was able to return back to baseball in 1948, and then it was in 1949 that the Brooklyn Dodgers drafted Lasorda from the Phillies organization, essentially purchased his contract to where they sent him to the minor leagues for a couple of years, until ultimately he made his big league debut as a player in 1954. So a handful of years in the minor leagues with the Dodgers, a couple of different stints in Greenville, up in Montreal. But then, like I said, ultimately broke through in 1954. And Tommy Lasorda as a player, I mean, his stats aren't going to jump out at you. He had 9 innings for Brooklyn in 1954, an ERA of 5.0. He had 4 innings in 1955. And then his most complete season in 1956 actually came for Kansas City, the Athletics, at the time in the American League, where he threw 45 innings, appeared in 18 games to a 6.15 ERA that season. But he also was hitting back then as well. Apparently the designated hitter wasn't around in the American League back in 1956 because he got a total of 13 at-bats that year, and he was able to come up with 1 hit. So my man Tommy Lasorda has a big league hit to his name and a career average of .071, where he was 1 of 14 across his three years there in the big league. So from a player side of things, you know, Tommy left a lot to be desired, but he became very close with his manager, his AAA manager, as he was coming up through the minor leagues. And it was this gentleman that actually gave him an opportunity to then join the Dodgers organization as a coach. And this, of course, is what Tommy's known for, a Hall of Fame manager, and honestly, just a fantastic character when it comes to that side of things. So he worked his way up through the minor leagues, spent a handful of years. He also coached in the Dominican Winter Baseball League. He won the 1973 Caribbean Series, or World Series, in Venezuela. He then became the Dodgers' third base coach in 1973, before ultimately being named the manager in 1976. So he spent 20 years as the Dodgers manager from the years 1976 all the way through 1996. He won 2 World Series championships, the first one coming in 1981, the second one in 1988, which, of course, was the most recent title for the Dodgers up until this past October, a few months ago. And you know, isn't it fitting that Tommy Lasorda gets to see his Dodgers win another World Series title just months before ultimately he passes away here? He was in attendance for Game 6 down there in Texas this past season, so he was able to see his Dodgers win another World Series in person and able to feel the joy and euphoria I'm sure that a lot of individuals associated with that organization were feeling at the time. So he additionally won 2 National League pennants, lost in the World Series in 1977 and 1978. So Tommy's first 2 full seasons as manager, he went 98 and 64, followed that up with 95 and 67 to win the National League both years, and then ultimately breaking through in 81 to win that World Series title. But total record over the course of 21 years, he went 1,599 victories to 1,438 losses, which is good for a .526 winning percentage. And those 1,599 wins actually puts him second all-time in Dodgers manager history and 22nd on the all-time managers list. So, of course, known as one of the best, known as one of the biggest characters in all of Major League Baseball as well. He was thrown out 48 times throughout the course of his 20-year career. Now, if you would do some research there, that's got nothing on Bobby Cox down there in Atlanta or Lou Piniella or any other character that you can think of on the managerial side of things. But Tommy definitely wasn't short on words and really knew how to leverage and how to utilize baseball writers, baseball analysts to get a story out. You know, a lot of people who have written their experiences with Tommy say that, you know, he would chastise you, he would cuss you out, but then afterwards he'd look at you, smile, and wink because he knows that the power they have and the influence that they can have on the game of baseball as well. So I wanted to pull up a couple of quotes here before I kind of run down a few other accomplishments for him here. But these come from his autobiography or just time throughout Major League Baseball where he said, quote, "Sometimes you've just got to let an umpire know that you're not satisfied with his decision. Not that it's going to do you any good, but you've got to let them know." And basically he's saying, yeah, I'm going to get kicked out. They're not going to change their mind, but I have an opinion on what you're telling me, and I'm going to make you aware, and I'm going to share it. So certainly had a relationship with umpires that went well beyond his managerial time. during his time as a scout, advisor, analyst. There were a lot of stories about him and umpires running into each other and having a good time going back and forth and really discussing the past and the great times they had around the ballparks. But a few quotes that not only pertain to baseball, but actually to life itself as well with Tommy Lasorda. He has a quote that says, "I believe managing is like holding a dove in your hand. If you hold it too tightly, you'll kill it. But if you hold it too loosely, you'll lose it." And this goes along the lines with his managerial style that he actually got from his mentor, that AAA manager. I don't have his name in front of me, but he basically said that sometimes a pat on the back can be just as effective and just as important as a kick to the butt. And Tommy really prided himself on knowing which player ultimately needed which style of coaching, and that if you treat all your players like humans, they'll play for you like Superman, and really individualizing the managerial position. Because a lot of times people say, hey, this is my style, this is how I go about it. Either you're kind of a hard nose or you're a player's coach, and there really isn't an in-between on the spectrum. But he basically lets you know that each individual person is different and you need to manage them accordingly. So he has a quote talking about Fernando Venezuela, who became the baseball's highest paid pitcher in 1986. He said, quote, "All last year we tried to teach him English, and the only word he learned was million." Because Fernando, of course, got a huge deal and got paid through that time. So Tommy Lasorda, he was known, of course, as a character, and a lot of his quotes and a lot of the interviews that you can find out there on YouTube are not for this podcast consumption. There are a couple of different instances that are mostly well known where there was a player who called him out and called him the fat little Italian. He called him out for telling his pitcher to throw at him following something that happened the previous day, and Lasorda uses quite a few expletives to discuss that. Why would I throw at a guy hitting $130? If I was going to throw at a guy, it'd be a guy who's any good and any this and any that, and basically shut your mouth and go away. And there's a few of these thoughts. I believe it was Dale Murphy back in the day had 3 home runs against him, and he was asked the next day, ultimately his thoughts, and he was just sarcastic. And of course, I thought it was terrible. I mean, the guy only hit 3 home runs. What's his deal? And again, there are a few more bleeps and expletives in there, but you guys can certainly YouTube those and listen to those because they are very entertaining and certainly fantastic to listen to here. But Lasorda, myself, being from the Philadelphia area, one of the main memories that I have, of course, being born in the 1989 year. I didn't get to see him manage any of these teams, but he was in Philadelphia, and he had a run-in with the Fanatic. And the Fanatic at the time, there's a story out there now about how these two were actually friends. But Tommy Lasorda, the Fanatic would steal Lasorda's jersey every time and mess with it when they came to town. And Lasorda started to grow sick of this and basically knew it was coming, so only printed 1 jersey for the trip, and he had it on himself the entire time. So the Fanatic, now knowing this, went out to a sporting goods store, bought a plain Dodgers jersey, had a buddy of his embroider the number 2, Lasorda on the back, and he put this on a mannequin or a dummy that he rode out on his ATV, his four-wheeler, and basically caught the whiff of Lasorda, who was extremely upset with him, came storming out of the dugout, grabs the mannequin, beats the Fanatic over the head with it multiple times. The Fanatic's quoted as saying later he's thinking, oh my God, he's actually upset. My head's going to fall off here in this costume. I'm going to get fired. What the heck is going on? And then afterwards, they kissed and made up, so to speak, and we're on great terms and great friends. But it is still, to this day, a fantastic video clip and just a lot of fun to watch Lasorda and the Fanatic go at it. But Lasorda as a whole, like I mentioned, one of his best accomplishments, honestly, in my opinion, was winning Olympic gold in the year 2000 for the USA baseball team. He was the manager of that team. There's a story being told where the press was not allowed, but one gentleman snuck his way down there to listen to a pregame speech Lasorda was giving, and Lasorda was telling these guys, and again, this is when the Olympics took place during the summer, so Major League Baseball talent is not participating on these teams, and he goes on to say, I think I have multiple Cy Young winners in here. You guys could beat the Yankees if you wanted to. This is the best team I've ever managed. And, of course, they went out and completely dominated in the year 2000 to win gold medals. So Tommy was known for his pregame speeches. He was known for giving other teams and organizations speeches. He's talked to the Notre Dame football team. He's talked to anybody you can think of, and he's quoted as saying, whenever I talk to somebody pregame, they always end up winning. And very full of himself, very confident, but a fantastic person as well. So 71 total years with the Dodgers. He managed 9 Rookie of the Year award winners, which is just fascinating because you only have 20 years as a manager, so meaning almost half of those years, somebody on his squad was able to win Rookie of the Year, which really spoke to Lasorda's player development and ultimately how he could relate to players of any generation across because, you know, year 1 as a manager and year 20, these kids up and coming are certainly coming from a different environment, a different world, and being able to relate to these individuals was very, very impressive. So Lasorda was known to have friends in Hollywood. He was close with Frank Sinatra and other stars. Even after his managing career, when he was a scout or an analyst for the team, he would always sit behind home plate, always be in celebrity row, and was basically a rock star wherever he went. Because the Dodgers, of course, one of the biggest organizations in baseball, and Lasorda, one of the biggest names within that organization. So rest in peace to Tommy Lasorda. He passes away from a heart attack at the age of 93. But, of course, the Hall of Fame manager and one of the best overall spokesmen, ambassadors, not only here in the U.S., but also internationally, like I mentioned with the Olympics, also involved with the World Baseball Classic and getting that off the ground and spreading the word and joy around the WBC. So Tommy Lasorda, as a Phillies fan and as a just overall baseball fan, I thank you for everything you've done for the game, and I wish that you rest in peace here for eternity. So one headline or quote I said is that Tommy Lasorda hasn't died. His volume has just been turned down. So condolences out there to the Lasorda family and anybody who knew Tommy. But that'll do it here for the first segment. We'll step aside here now for a word from one of our sponsors and one of our sister shows. But when we come back, we're going to get into our second segment, which is the Fransisco Lindor trade. The Mets and Indians make a deal. Who won the trade? Who's going where? Stick around and find out. We're going to talk all about it.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Welcome back to the second segment of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. Hopefully you guys are having a good week out there. It is Monday, January 11th. If you haven't done so yet, I don't know what the heck you're waiting for. I mean, I ask you guys every time. Check us out on social media. Head to Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn. Check out both GSMC Baseball as well as the GSMC Podcast Network. That goes a long way for continuing to help us grow out here. Obviously, 2021, everybody knows the influence of social media, the influence of the internet. So if you guys are listening to this, take a brief moment, double-click that home button. If you still got one of those iPhones like I do with the home button, if not, just let it read your face, swipe up, head to Facebook, Twitter, give us a like, give us a follow, please subscribe. We certainly appreciate it here. But jumping in now to the updated news across Major League Baseball. Over the past 48 hours here, it has become finalized that Fransisco Lindor will ultimately be heading to the New York Mets. And I don't think this is a big surprise to anybody out there. This has long been rumored to be in the works. Of course, there were a few other teams that were having conversations with the Indians about adding Lindor's services, but with new ownership in New York, that was clearly the one that jumps out as the biggest potential landing spot, and it was really just a matter of time until these teams came to an agreement on a trade or on a deal to ultimately move forward. So who's going where? Who got what? Well, we'll start out with the New York Mets. They are adding Fransisco Lindor as well as Carlos Carrasco, who honestly, that was the surprise when I saw the deal, because I knew Lindor was going to move, but you figured it would be a 4-for-1, 5-for-1 type of deal, and the Indians were willing to throw in Carrasco, and that one to me is the more surprising of the two, because yes, Carrasco has 2 years and $27 million still left on his deal, and we all know this was a salary dump by the Cleveland Indians here, very similar to what the Boston Red Sox were looking at last year with the Mookie Betts deal, and we're going to look at that a little bit later in regards to a deeper comparison here. But the Indians moving on from Lindor and his $30 million a year salary, Carrasco thrown in there again, like I mentioned, at $13-14 million a year. So it's a home run move for the Mets. I mean, again, looking at this from the Mets' perspective right away, it's absolutely a deal you do based on who you gave up. We'll talk about that when we transition to Cleveland side of things. But, looking at the Mets now and transitioning into 2021, of course, the biggest question mark and the biggest hurdle that remains here for the casual sports fan or even your diehard Mets fan is that, yes, Lindor is still scheduled to be a free agent after this upcoming season. Now, you don't make this move with the thoughts that Lindor is going to walk or you're not going to be willing to pay him enough to keep him around town. And Lindor, of course, knowing the Mets and ownership and what they have now from a financial capability, should be very pleased with what, destination he ended up at. Because Lindor, talking contract status, this is going to be big when it comes to the market, because the shortstop position, the biggest contracts in the history of baseball, have been handed out to Alex Rodriguez in the $250 million mark. Of course, he got that twice, once from the Texas Rangers when he was primarily a shortstop, and then again from the New York Yankees when ultimately he decided he would move to third base to allow Derek Jeter to continue to play the shortstop position. And I think this number is going to fall, because after that, the next highest guy who's currently still playing or at the shortstop spot is at about $125 million. So Lindor is absolutely going to wipe the floor with that type of money and completely reset the market. So guys out there who are upcoming in the shortstop spot, waiting for this deal to happen, they are big fans of this move. I mean, the likes of Carlos Carrasco, who's going to hit the market in a year. I mean, even free agents this offseason. Andrelton Simmons, Didi Gregorius, a handful of others out there potentially in line for a payday moving forward. Javier Baez in a year or two as well is certainly paying attention to what's going on out there. So if Lindor does indeed get that $300+ million that I believe is rightfully owned to him based on his output, his statistics, what he brings, his flair, his energy, being the face of your franchise, potentially if you're the Mets, is something that they're not going to balk at, and certainly something that they're looking to address here sooner than later. But are the Mets done? I don't know. I mean, George Springer is still very much in play, according to what's going on out there in the industry. I do think that this could eliminate them from the Trevor Bauer sweepstakes, and I think the addition of Carrasco actually does that more than the addition of Lindor's potential contract, because with the front rotation, you got DeGrom, you got Marcus Stroman coming back. Now you add Carrasco, you have Syndergaard, who they re-signed. Yes, he's injured, but they re-signed him with hopes of potentially adding him to a longer-term deal once he's able to prove he's healthy. But putting Lindor in the middle of that lineup around Pete Alonso and other guys up in New York, I think this team certainly got exponentially better over the last 48 hours. Now, are they a World Series contender? Are they a National League contender? I still think they're a half a step below the other top teams in the National League. I still would put the Dodgers at the top of the list, and based on what San Diego has been able to do here over the past week or 2 weeks, I believe they are right there with the Dodgers. And then I still have the Atlanta Braves as that crown jewel in the National League East. And does this close the gap between the Mets and the Braves? Absolutely. Does it close the gap between the Mets and the Nationals? Absolutely. Do I think the Mets could be better than the Nationals? That certainly depends on health of the starting rotation, health of the lineup. But Strasburg, Scherzer, Corbin is a very viable top three, but as is DeGrom, Stroman, and Carrasco. Potentially adding Syndergaard in there would give them a fantastic four down the future. So I think those three teams have certainly separated themselves from the Marlins and the Phillies. And this is a Phillies team who continues to just, tread water, not do anything. The Marlins made the playoffs last season in the shortened season. I don't think that will continue into 2021. Yes, I think they'll be a decent ball club, but I don't have them in any playoff predictions here moving forward. So the Mets, they get an A minus in my book. I mean, they gave up some prospects, both major league level and minor league level. And I really think the A is determining of whether or not they're able to sign Lindor. Because if you're giving up this prospect pool and allowing Lindor to walk here, that grade certainly goes down to the B minus C plus range. Because yes, Lindor is that good, and I would take his services for a year. But you're not making a deal like this with the mentality of, we're going to let him walk or at least test free agency the following season. So shout out to the New York Mets making moves, adding Trevor May. They've added James McCann behind the dish. So while everybody else is sitting at home kind of thinking to themselves, hey, this pandemic, we're looking at things economically, the Mets are going out there pushing forward, making big plays, and I don't think they're done when it comes to big free agent additions this offseason here. So transitioning now to the Cleveland side of things, they added 4 players in the deal for Carrasco and Lindor. 2 of them are at the big league talent level, and they are both shortstops. So Cleveland basically gives up the face of the franchise, the shortstop of the future, but in return, they believe they found a viable shortstop option that is going to be much more cost efficient. And they will be choosing between 2 individuals. First is Andrés Giménez, who last year had a very good year at shortstop for the Mets, albeit in a shortened season. And, of course, this was his first year above the AA level, so he still needs a little bit more seasoning at the minor league level, but hitting .263 your first year in the bigs is nothing to sneeze at. And, his versatility is something that they're enamored with in Cleveland as well. They think he's got gold glove caliber defense, not only at the shortstop spot, but also second base, third base. And they're really happy with bringing him back in return. And the other gentleman they got at the shortstop spot was actually Ahmed Rosario, who a handful of years ago was rated as one of the top prospects, not only for the Mets, but all of baseball. And he had a number of good years in 2017 and 2018, but he's fallen off here just a little bit, transitioning from 2019 to 2020. I mean, he's a career .268 hitter. He hit down in the 240s this year, and by the end of the shortened season, that's where Giménez had actually taken over for Rosario at that shortstop spot. Now, did that take Rosario completely out of the lineup? It did not. So you could move him over to second base. In Cleveland as well, you have Cesar Hernandez, who played second base for them and did quite well. He's a very good big league player, but I believe you could upgrade over Hernandez, and it comes down to the financials between Rosario, Giménez, and Hernandez, and ultimately who is looking for what, because both of these guys, yes, their primary spot is shortstop, but they do have the ability to move around and certainly aren't fish out of water any other place here in the infield. So Giménez potentially being the shortstop of the future at a much cheaper price. You probably won't get the offensive upside of Fransisco Lindor, but they do believe the defensive side of his game could challenge that gold glove level year in and year out. And then you add another big league level player who was recently a top prospect in Rosario. And I think those two guys at the cheap level that they are is why Cleveland was really looking to add them to part of this deal because you get 2 major league level ready talents, and then you get 2 lottery tickets and low minor league level talents as well. The Mets included sending to Cleveland Isaiah Green, who is a high school outfielder. He was a second-round draft pick this past summer in 2020, which means, of course, he hasn't had any professional experience thus far with the cancellation of the minor leagues, but he was the 9th-rated prospect in the Mets system coming out. A big kid, a lot of upside, and ultimately paid a good signing bonus to forgo his college commitment, and people are really high on his potential moving forward. Now, he's 3-4 years away from big league level time, as well as Josh Wolf, who is a right-handed pitcher and was the 4th and final prospect included in this deal. Now, Josh was able to get some time in 2019 down at the Gulf Coast League for the Mets, and he was rated as the 10th rated prospect in the entirety of the Mets organization. But when you're looking at these prospects, neither of them are in the top 150 overall for Major League Baseball. So very similar to what the Cubs got back for Yu Darvish, the Mets are taking high-level lottery tickets and former second-round picks and hoping that they're going to pan out and make a move for them a few years from now. Because Wolf, he was actually so highly regarded by the Mets that they gave him a $2.1 million signing bonus coming out of high school, which was about $800,000 more than his slot pick there in the second round. So Wolf was going to head to Texas A&M until the Mets ultimately threw that money at him. He averages about 93 on his fastball, has hit 96. He's only 20 years old, continuing to add strength, as well as based on the scouting reports, his top pitch is the slider and his secondary pitch. So you get a guy in the mid-90s with an above-average slider, and you're looking at a potential steal there a handful of years from now. But the Indians, they're looking at a young starting rotation moving into next year. And yes, they have a couple of guys who could make the list. You have Scott Moss, Logan Allen, Sam Hentges, Eli Morgan, Joey Cantillo into that list as well. A couple of those guys were in the Clevinger deal last year, which sent him to San Diego. Moss is a 26-year-old lefty out of the University of Florida, drafted back in 2016. In the minor leagues, he's got a career record of 41-17 with a 3.28 ERA. He had a 1.93 ERA in AAA in 2019. Of course, 2020 being shut down. So it's a decent return, but anytime you give up Lindor, I have a tough time going above the C+, B- range when it comes to grading this trade from the Indian side of things. So if we fast forward 4 or 5 years, Jimenez, Rosario are infield stalwarts for them. Then you have Green and Wolf making contributions. You could look back and say, hey, yeah, that was a good deal because we got 4 contributing guys instead of 1 shortstop who's now making $35-40 million a year, potentially moving forward. So topping things off here as we're wrapping up segment number 2, how does this compare to the Mookie Betts deal with the Dodgers? Because like I said, the Red Sox and Indians both trying to shed payroll, which meant that their leverage, really wasn't that high, and you weren't going to get, something that puts you over the moon in return for these guys. So it kind of comes down to how you feel about Jimenez and his growth and his development compared to Alex Verdugo, who was the major league level talent sent from Mookie Betts. And Verdugo's a very nice player. Jimenez could develop into a better player. And then, of course, you have the conversation as to which prospects you would rather have and which ones you think ultimately are panning out. But on the surface, it is very similar, very comparable to what the Dodgers gave up for Betts. And, really that's probably the groundwork that was being laid over the past couple of months is, ultimately, hey, this is our barometer, this is what we're looking at, and this is the direction we are going to go. So the Mets making moves, they're making everybody out there very much aware that, hey, we're coming for you, not only this year, but in the future, as they're not done yet. And then the Indians just dumping payroll, as it now looks like 2021, their payroll sits anywhere between $35 and $45 million. And I mean, that's a payroll for the Rays or a payroll, for the Athletics, because Lindor himself is going to get 30, 35 million. And now the entire team in Cleveland is going to be about 40 to 45. So, fascinating which direction they're going. It'll be interesting to see if the rebuild ultimately works, because they're looking a number of years down the road to be back to competitive and ultimately getting back to the World Series and trying to end that drought for the first time since 1947. But that'll do it here for the second segment of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. We'll step aside one more time here for a word from our sponsors and sister shows, but when we come back, we'll get into news and notes around the league. There's a few signings, a few updates, as well as a potential scandal that seems to be being put on the back burner by Major League Baseball. So stick around. I'll tell you all about it.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Again, and thanks for listening to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. Have you guys checked out the other shows within the network yet? If you haven't done so, you should probably do it now. I mean, with everything going on in the world, whether it's news, politics, everything knows what happened in D.C. this past week with the inauguration coming up, the transition, stimulus packages, all that good stuff. You can check out the politics podcast, the news podcast. They'll keep you up to date on everything. Or if you're a sports guy like myself who just likes to kind of escape the real world when it comes to their podcast listening and ultimately, intake of content, do yourself a favor. Check out football. Like I said, we're recording here now during the playoffs. We have basketball back in full force, college basketball. We have the national championship in football. That is tonight if you're listening to this here on release date, the 11th. So the guys will be talking about that and what to expect here transitioning into 2021, into the fall as well, and a plethora of other different options out there. Music, movies, books, whatever you're into, there's a podcast for you within the network. So hit that little search icon. It looks like a magnifying glass for those of you out there. Type in GSMC, and you'll get plenty of different options with tremendous content that you guys can listen to whenever you're bored out there. If you're working from home, doing some chores, throw it on in the background, stay up to date with everything going on, and you can thank me later. So here in segment number 3, we're actually going to jump into news and notes that are currently taking place across Major League Baseball. What's the latest rumors? Where are we at? What's up to date? And the most recent bombshell that's being talked about out there is a potential contract extension in the works for Fernando Tatis Jr. And this deal could be record-setting because the rumors or the talks out there are 10-plus years, $300-plus million. One of the numbers the reports are very keen on is 11 years, $320 million, which breaks down to just about $29 million a year. And really, that is a lot of money for a guy who, over the course of 2 seasons, yes, but has played a total of 143 games. So really only one complete season of Major League statistics for Tatis. He's a 300 hitter, 35-plus home runs, a ton of RBIs, so the stats are there. It's just a matter of if it's too early for Tatis to get one of these deals. I mean, the guy's still under contract. He's arbitration eligible for the next 3 years, so he wouldn't even hit free agency until 2025, which truly means that this deal would be buying out 7 years of potential free agency time for Tatis. Now, there isn't any talk yet on how the contract will be structured, whether it will be similar to Machado, where he will have an opt-out after year 5 of his 10-year deal, or if it'll be similar to Bryce Harper, where there are no opt-outs during the entirety of the 13-year contract that he signed. So some of these details yet to be determined could ultimately sway whether or not I think this really is a good idea for the Padres. But, I mean, only 6 players in baseball history have gotten over $300 million, and, of course, all 6 have come in the last 2 to 3 years here, with the biggest one, Mike Trout's over $400 million. Most recently, you had Mookie Betts signed for that much. The year prior, we had Harper and Machado. Garrett Cole being the only pitcher to surpass that $300 million mark. And then Giancarlo Stanton of the Yankees and formerly of the Marlins getting that type of money as well. So when I say the names of Trout, Betts, Harper, Cole, Machado, do you think Tatis Jr. next along that list? Is that the first one that pops into your head? And honestly, it isn't for me, but the reason that the Padres are looking into this is because the first name that does pop into my head is Fransisco Lindor. And if Fransisco Lindor sets the market at $30-35 million a year, say he gets 10 and $350 for the Mets here, and the Padres don't have these conversations with Tatis, and he continues over the next 2 years to put up great numbers, 300-plus stolen bases, home runs, fantastic defense, that $35 million is going to go up. He's going to say, yeah, Lindor signed that, but that was years ago, and now the market's at $40 million a year. So now you're looking at 10 years and $400 million for Tatis Jr. because there's quotes out there from the Mets saying that Lindor's contract will be, quote, evolutionary for the shortstop position. And it is because of this that little tidbits are coming out in San Diego that they actually want to get ahead of this deal because they're worried as to where the Mets are ultimately looking to land when it comes to total number of dollars as well as AAV, or average annual value, which are kind of the two buckets that player and team look at in regards to setting records or breaking contract records. So is it too early? I believe it is, in my opinion. I mean, I'm not comparing the two, but the Phillies handed Scott Kingery a large deal based on his minor league statistics, and they haven't translated to the major league level. Now, yes, Tatis, he's been in the majors. His stats are at the major league level. But again, I don't think we've seen enough, considering it's only been 143 games, to ultimately award a guy $300+ million. I mean, every one of these other guys, Trout's, Betts, Harper, Stanton, Machado, they put up 5-7 years worth of these statistics before they sniffed $300 million. So for the Padres to just kind of fast forward and say, hey, we're putting the trust in you to go ahead and continue to develop is certainly a very risky move. So I'd be curious what you Padres fans are thinking out there, because my inner circle, guys I've reached out to, general surprise seems to be the initial reaction. Now, I'm not saying he's not worth it, and of course, if you're going to give me $320 million, I'm going to sign it. But really looking at it, I think it is just a bit too early. In other news across Major League Baseball, Kyle Schwarber has signed a 1-year deal with the Washington Nationals. It is a 1-year, $10 million deal. There is a mutual option for 2022 for a 1-year, $11 million deal with a $3 million buyout. So really, if you're Schwarber, you're looking at this at worst-case scenario. I'm looking at 1 year, $13 million, and then heading back into free agency. Best case scenario, I'm looking at 2 years and $21 million. So a win-win when it comes to Schwarber. There had been talks about him to the Nationals in the last couple of weeks as an option after he was cut by the Cubs. And, you know, the Nationals looking at the Mets making moves, the Braves making moves. I like this from an offensive perspective. The only thing would be where he hits in their lineup and ultimately how they lay out that right-left combination. You have Juan Soto, of course, in the middle of that lineup. Kyle Schwarber, where does he hit? Is it 1, 2, 3? Where does Soto hit? Do you go left, right in there with Turner offsetting those guys, or who are we adding as well to the offense to protect these guys in the lineup? But on the surface, I certainly like this move for both Schwarber and the Nationals, and I do think it's a fit when it comes to this season and ultimately progressing and trying to get back to World Series and winning it if you're a Nationals fan. So Schwarber to the Nationals for 1, potentially 2 years was announced this past week as well. Let's see, as we're bouncing around here, the Chicago Cubs, we just talked about them with Schwarber, of course, but they are still listening on Chris Bryant as well as Wilson Contreras. A lot of chatter has been picking up here when it comes to Wilson Contreras potentially being sent to the LA Angels. Now, this is due to the connection there between Contreras and Joe Maddon. Maddon managing the Cubs a number of years, having a great relationship with Contreras, very much being an advocate for his style of game. So a lot of people are making those connections, putting those dots together and saying that Contreras to the Angels is just a matter of time, and it really comes down to what they're willing to give up and, meet the price tag of the Cubs there. So Contreras to the Angels. The Phillies could be an outside opportunity there. If they don't bring Real Muto back, their name continues to be floated around because the rest of the catching market is kind of going off the books here. We had McCann sign. We had a couple other low-level signings throughout baseball. So those top names of, guys behind the dish are getting thinner and thinner. And if it's not going to be Real Muto, Contreras might be that second-best option for all teams looking. Chris Bryant, there's a little bit less clarity in regards to possible destinations. There was talk about the Mets. There's talk about the Braves potentially being an option. And honestly, I don't know where he ends up. I would love to see him on the Phillies, but I don't believe the Phillies have the pieces to get it done with Chicago. The prospects that Chicago would be looking for, I don't think Philadelphia is willing to part with. And it just becomes a matter of time to see if the market is saturated enough to where if the Cubs come back and say, okay, we'll take those guys you were offering, we couldn't do any better anywhere else. But Bryant, Contreras, a bunch of other Cubbies still being listened on. And don't be surprised if the Cubs make an additional move here throughout the offseason as well. The Boston Red Sox, they are listening on Andrew Benintendi. Apparently talks are getting very serious with a couple of different clubs out there. I keep bringing up the Phillies, but there's been talk in the local media that the Phillies could be a potential landing spot for a guy like Benintendi because his price tag could be much lower than that of Bryant or Contreras, and he's still a very capable major league player. I mean, there was a time there during probably 2016 through 2018 that it looked like Benintendi was part of the core in Boston that they were going to go into kind of this next wave with. Yeah, everybody knew Betts could be on the way out, but Benintendi was going to be the guy who could come in and replace him on a day-to-day basis for the Red Sox. So to be determined on ultimately where he ends up. But again, Boston apparently in deep discussions with multiple teams about possibly moving on from Andrew Benintendi. Last year, we have the Astros. They are in on every high-leverage reliever. They are looking to add a veteran closer, a veteran setup man. They moved on from Roberto Ozuna this past offseason. Ryan Presley was their closer this past year. He had success in the closing role, but has never been a major league closer on a regular basis. And he's had a ton of success in that 7th, 8th inning role, being that high-leverage strikeout arm down there in Houston. So they're looking to add kind of that final piece to help establish that bullpen and continue to help Ryan's progression, get him comfortable potentially moving into being a closer. But they are in on a lot of guys, Colomb, Hands, Hendricks, anybody you can think of, they are communicating with on the bullpen side of things. When it comes to non-stateside baseball, Sugano is actually going to return back to Japan. I talked to you guys about Sagano, Kim, a few other guys who were posted from the international teams or the international leagues, and ultimately it looks like Sugano is going to return back to the Yomiuri Giants and ultimately take their deal. Now, he did have offers in Major League Baseball from teams, but none of them were enticing enough to ultimately go away from, his home, his comfort level over there in Japan as well. So that does it for the rumors across Major League Baseball. One last thing I do want to bring up here in this segment is the current lawsuit going back and forth between Brian Bubba Harkins, a former employee of the LA Angels who has recently been fired and labeled the scapegoat for what was happening there in LA. He is suing for defamation, basically saying that they're making him the scapegoat because baseball doesn't want another scandal being broken out when it comes to potentially cheating or altering the rules after what happened with the Astros and the Red Sox. And there was a recent file in this lawsuit that was pretty damning for a few players out there. And basically what's going on is this guy was a clubhouse attendant for the Angels for years and years and years. And apparently he would make some sort of, I'll call it a solution, a substance is probably another word for it. But it was a mixture of rosin, pine tar, and Mota stick, M-O-T-A, which for those of you played, rosin is what the pitchers use for grip. Pine tar is used on the bat, and the Mota stick is kind of that glue-like, substance that you see them putting down their handle when they're rubbing it on their bat. So he would put together some sort of concoction. A lot of Angels pitchers used it for years, but things grew outside of just L.A. to where other players across Major League Baseball were requesting this substance from Harkins. And he actually submitted a text message from Garrett Cole as evidence in regards to the fact that everybody knew. And it's pretty damning. So I'll read you the text here. It says, quote, "Hey, Bubba, it's Garrett Cole. I was wondering if you could help me out with this sticky situation," adding a wink emoji to the text. He then followed up with, "We don't see you until May, but we have some road games in April that are in cold places, and the stuff I had last year seizes up when it gets cold." So, of course, he went to Harkins. It's known that he was able to provide this to multiple pitchers throughout Major League Baseball. Some of the other names that Harkins mentions are big names. Of course, Cole. You also have Verlander, and that makes sense because if Cole's in Houston at the time this text was sent, he's down there with JV. And if Verlander's using the substance, Cole's going to say, "Hey, where'd you get it from? Give me his number. Let me text him." So those two things certainly align. You also have the name Adam Wainwright being mentioned, Corey Kluber being mentioned, as well as Felix Hernandez being mentioned in this lawsuit. So he is basically saying that baseball is burying this as deep down as they possibly can because they don't want this to be a big scene, a big deal, be talked about because of what happened in Houston and Boston and the cheating scandals. And now here comes another one with performance-enhancing substances and the likes there. So certainly want to do some research on your own into this. I don't want to make any conclusions either way, but a text message direct from Garrett Cole telling me to help me out with this sticky situation, wink face, certainly gives some credibility to this gentleman as to the fact that people knew, and he shouldn't be the only one that is getting in trouble for this type of instance. But that'll do it here for the third segment. I appreciate you guys listening in. We'll step aside one last time for a word from our sponsors and our sister shows. But when we come back, segment number 4, we're going to have some more fun. Last episode, I talked to you guys about my favorite baseball movies. This time, I'm going to talk to you guys about some of the best documentaries out there. You guys are going to want to check these out, man. There's a lot of good stuff. So stick around here one more time. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. We'll be right back.
Want to know the latest in soccer? Then listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast. From MLS, the World Cup, and the Premier League, we've got you covered. The latest updates, the hottest matches, and news on the league's top players. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast.
David Beckham scores the goal to take England all the way to the World Cup finals.
Listen now.
Welcome into the fourth and final segments of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I appreciate you listening in. If you haven't done so yet, rate and review the podcast wherever you guys are listening. I know there's a ton of platforms out there now. You got Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, however many more are popping up, Pandora, Amazon, Alexa. So wherever you guys are listening, hit that 5-star review, hit that like button, rate, subscribe, all of the stuff that goes along with being a podcast here in 2021. I certainly appreciate it, as well as share us with your friends. Be a friend, tell a friend. Let them know, hey, it's the middle of January. I don't know how Kev does it. He's talking to us twice a week about Major League Baseball. There's nothing going on, and yet here it is. Quality episodes, day in and day out. So I come to you guys twice a week. Everybody else within the baseball podcast, they're filling in the rest of the time. And we certainly appreciate you guys, because without you guys, none of this is possible. If we don't have the fans, if we don't have the listeners, we're not able to sell the ads. And, of course, this entire business model is for naught. So if you guys could text this to a friend, be a friend, tell a friend, family, whoever it is, copy and paste the link, share us. We certainly appreciate it here within the podcast network. But segment number 4 is a fun one here. Last episode I told you guys, hey, here are the best baseball movies. These are the ones I like. We had some kids' movies, some real movies. But now we're going to transition over into documentaries. And honestly, there's more baseball documentaries out there than even I was aware of. So I wanted to talk to you guys about kind of my favorites. I don't know. Let's see. How many do I have written down here? 7 or so. But there's a handful that, I was able to find upon doing my research, and quite a few that I'm going to check out, whether it's HBO, Netflix, Hulu, a lot of streaming providers having these documentaries available to you guys, and they are all fantastic options for you. So, like I said, I'm going to run through my favorite 7, and you guys out there, let me know if there's any more that you have watched or that you loved that I should get into, because there's a few that were in a couple of top 10s that I had never even heard of. So I want to hear from you guys to see if, in fact, they're worth checking out. But the first one I have here, it's titled Screwball. And no, this one is not about the pitch Screwball, because that'll come up a couple of different times here throughout the episode. But this one actually dives into the doping and performance-enhancing drugs that really started with the Mitchell reports and the Balco reports, a handful of years when the first bombshell dropped across Major League Baseball. And what Screwball does so well is that they look at this not really from like an on-the-field baseball perspective, hey, it's going to increase this or make you better at that. It really gets into kind of the science and the infrastructure behind the doping scandal, and ultimately how they were able to avoid detection for quite some time, because there's a gentleman on there whose program was tried and true. You wouldn't be caught at the major league level. He worked with multiple big league guys. The big ones here, of course, Alex Rodriguez, Manny Ramirez, and discussing take this at this time, this on a day off, this on game day, and, the trace of whatever drug in your system will never be high enough to kind of click that positive test result. And really how things started to go downhill after Manny Ramirez forgot it was game day when it wasn't, and took something he wasn't supposed to, and then had a surprise test. And the gentleman who was providing these drugs says, I'm only as good as the program. If you don't listen to the program, you're going to get caught, and made this aware, and it was a mistake. And the other good point of this documentary is that a lot of these scenes are reenacted by kids, and it kind of gives a lighthearted feel to it or view to it, where they do a lot of dub overs with the voices. They'll have the kids acting while the adults are telling the stories of the meeting, so you can kind of get a feel for what this meeting looked like or how it went. And, really, it's just amazing how this entire empire almost came down over just a handful of thousands of dollars that, really a gym rat thought he was owed, wasn't getting paid, so he broke in and made, everything public. And I don't want to give it all away, but, Screwball available on Netflix, or at least it was where I watched it. Certainly worth a watch if you're a baseball fan and you want to learn more about PEDs and that whole era of baseball and how it transitions. And it's just a fascinating hour and a half to learn more about how the kind of Mitchell report really came to be there. So The next one I have on the list is The Battered Bastards of Baseball. And this one is available on Netflix here. It came out, I believe, in 2014, but it is a behind-the-scenes look and story being told about Bing Russell, Hollywood's Bing Russell. He actually started his own independent baseball team. And when he did this back in the 70s or 80s, it was the first independent baseball team in the entire country. I mean, now there's a handful of independent leagues. We just talked about the minor leagues, indie ball, going to AAA, vice versa. Like, there's quality baseball and independent ball out there now in 2020. But when Bing Russell started this team, that wasn't a thing. And he was, groundbreaking. He hired the first female general manager for this independent team. He had his son, Kurt Russell, the actor Kurt Russell, on the squad as well. So Kurt's telling stories about his dad and, the relationship they had, and really how this ragtag group of guys came from all over the country, all different backgrounds, really just looking to continue their career, keep playing ball. And they were able to put together a successful season. They got huge crowds. They were able to generate money. And ultimately, the team was bought out to become a minor league level affiliate after a handful of years because of the success they had. The community loved them. They were able to relate to these guys because they were like you and me and castaways and guys who were told they weren't good enough. And, now they're all coming together to have a successful team, a successful league. And it's just a fascinating story at, kind of look into the origins of independent baseball, of minor league baseball, and how they went about, paying these guys. And just the whole thing is absolutely fantastic. And Bing Russell standing up against the man and making the money. And it's a really good documentary that even non-baseball fans would enjoy because it's just a good human story of overcoming adversity and never giving up on your dreams and going after what you want and everything across those lines. So it's an excellent story, and it's titled The Battered Bastards of Baseball. So you're going to want to check that out on Netflix. The next one I have here is titled Fastball. Now, I mentioned Screwball earlier because there's two of them on here. Fastball is actually all about the pitch fastball and the history of the fastball and how they measured miles per hour years and years ago, and who threw the fastest pitch in the history of baseball, and how miles per hour have evolved over time. And originally, when they first started clocking miles per hour, it was done so when the ball was crossing home plate. And now here in 2020 and recently, it's actually when the ball is coming out of the pitcher's hand. So, of course, the ball is going to be coming a bit faster out of your hand than it is at home plate. So what's the difference there in miles per hour? Is Nolan Ryan at 100 when it's crossing home plate? Greater than, less than, or equal to Aroldis Chapman coming at you at 104 from the left side? And how they used to do it even before radar guns were a thing. They would put two basically squares that had flashes in between them, and the amount of time it took the ball to go through these panels, 1, 2, was how they would calculate speed, because then they had a reference point, so they had a still point to be able to reference motion in between and timing in regards to velocity. And, truly, I've touched on it here in parts, but it discusses really spin rate without actually realizing it's getting into spin rate and analytics and sabermetrics, because it talks about the rising fastball and can fastballs actually rise, and you get multiple testimonials about how, yes, you could actually do it, and you do this and it goes up, and then you have scientists come out saying it's physically impossible for a baseball to rise, and what just happens is due to the spin, the ball actually doesn't dip as much as the player thinks it's going to, and your human eye cannot physically see the baseball in its entirety from the pitcher's hand to home plate. So based on history and transgression, your body says, okay, it's here in my eye, which means it's going to be here by the time it crosses home plate. And due to velocity, it actually does not decline that much, so you swing underneath it all the time, and that's why you feel like the ball rises, but it doesn't rise, it just maintains its level. And so there's science involved, there's humans involved, and players say, yes, fastballs rise, scientists say, no, they don't, and the back and forth there is certainly entertaining, and ultimately deciding who had thrown the fastest pitch ever is certainly entertaining as well. So if you're on the pitching side of things, if you like that aspect of baseball, you're going to like the Fastball documentary on Netflix. The next one we have is Knuckleball. Again, this one is all about the knuckleball. I talked to you guys. Phil Niekro passed away not too long ago. We discussed potentially the greatest knuckleballer of all time. He was followed up by the likes of Tim Wakefield, R.A. Dickey, and this goes behind the scenes and looks a bit further into their career and the patience it takes to master a pitch such as the knuckleball and the patience it takes through the minor leagues because, you don't throw hard, you just throw a knuckler, and is this, do we let him on the team? Are they ever going to make it to the big league level? I mean, the guy couldn't break a pane of glass. He doesn't know where the ball's going, and making it dance and rotation, circumference, science involved again, air, all that good stuff. So it's very educational, and it gets your mind thinking in regards to rotation, airflow, science, and then you get the guys discussing the different grips and how they would push it, flick it, pull it, and the different ways to throw a knuckleball. R.A. Dickey throws a harder knuckleball than Wakefield throws a softer knuckleball, and they both have reasons as to why it's successful for them and navigating how hard they want to throw it, how soft, when it moves the most, and it's very, very good in regards to just kind of trying to understand the knuckleball as a pitch, because I can't throw it, so I have no idea how a knuckleball works. I mean, I watch these, look at the grips, I try to throw it myself, and I just can't throw a ball that doesn't have any rotation on it at all. So to hear them kind of break it down and discuss it, how they were introduced to it, where they were looking to go with it, it's just a fun ride and a fascinating conversation. So the next one I have here is 9 Innings from Ground Zero. This one discusses the events surrounding 9/11, 2001, with the World Trade Centers. Everybody knows there what happened, and the follow-up. George Bush at Yankee Stadium going out to the mound, throwing an absolute dart as a strike to home plate, and Mike Piazza going yard and making the country feel normal again and being able to get back to work, being in big crowds, because post 9/11, I was only 12 years old, but it really was one of those instances where it's like, man, should we get together in big groups? Was this a one-time thing? Are we done here? Really, what are we looking at in regards to kind of next steps and ultimately how we think things are going to play out here? So let's see. 9 Innings from Ground Zero, a fantastic piece there if you were alive or you were around in 2001, and a look at how baseball created an escape for a lot of Americans who didn't know what was going to take place, didn't know what the future held, and was just nice to get back to a bit of normalcy at that particular time. The next one here I have is called No. It's about Doc Ellis, who threw his no-hitter while he was on LSD for the Pittsburgh Pirates. And there's a YouTube clip that's about 5 to 10 minutes long that basically gives you the Spark Notes version of how he was in L.A. I think he was doing some LSD. He thought he was throwing a day or two later, but ultimately the trip lasted 48 hours, and he was still tripping when he was pitching in the game, and he felt like he was throwing to, I forget, like an alien-type being who was using a snake as a bat and couldn't see the catcher, and somehow this guy throws a no-hitter on all of this going on. I mean, just if you're not into drugs, you're not into all of that, that's fine. It's still a fascinating story to just hear the human mind and the capability it has while all of this is happening to still be able to perform at a historical level for Doc Ellis is just magnificent. And the visuals that are used, of course, because tripping LSD, it's a lot of hallucinations, a lot of visuals, so they tried to kind of portray what he was seeing so you can kind of see, oh my God, this is what he's looking at, and he was able to throw a no-hitter. I don't even know if I'd be able to see my feet 6 feet below me right now. So a fantastic story that honestly will never be repeated, should never be repeated, and is just one of the things in baseball that I think is the most insane true stories to have ever taken place. And the last one I have written down here is called Catching Hell, and this one is all about Steve Bartman and the Chicago Cubs. Everybody remembers Bartman against the Marlins, reaching over, trying to catch the foul ball while Moises Alou was trying to make a play. And I feel for the guy because in that situation, any fan would certainly love a souvenir. And it certainly doesn't help that the next guy hit a ground ball to shortstop that was kicked. Should have been a double play out of the inning. He boots it. Ultimately, they go into extras. They lose that game. They lose the next game. And Bartman, of course, was receiving death threats and needed security. And everybody kind of knows the follow-up story there. But it's just a fascinating kind of behind-the-scenes look and, a look at a bit of the dark side when it comes to sports. And nowadays, we'll see it on Twitter when it comes to an athlete maybe missing a field goal or, not coming through in the clutch. And back then, it was more fan mail, direct mail, and just straight hate when it came to Steve Bartman. But it's a fantastic look at it behind the scenes. And now that we've removed ourselves a number of years and the Cubs have won a World Series, you can kind of look on it and smile and laugh in regards to what took place there. But that'll do it, man. Another fantastic episode here of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, Monday, January 11th. Like I said, please rate and review the podcast. Share us with your friends. That goes a long way for helping us continue to spread the word here, continue to grow. And I myself am very thankful, when you guys are able to do that for us. But that'll do it. I'll talk to you guys again this Thursday. I know we'll have something going on across Major League Baseball to discuss. We'll have another fantastic episode, but try to enjoy your week between now and then. I certainly appreciate you guys listening. Like I said, rate and review, leave a comment, and I'll talk to you guys Thursday.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.